Okay, this is me giving a full review of the cube that I've been working on for about a year now called Strategic Inevitability. I'm going to go over sort of the general philosophy. I'm going to go over some of the major archetypes. And eventually, I'm going to go through every single card in the cube and maybe review some decks from the half a dozen to a dozen playtests that have happened of this cube that people have sent me. And hopefully this will be useful to someone, but even if it's only useful to me for things like what cards are maybe not pulling their weight, which cards I'm worried about, which cards are exciting, etc. All right, let's get started. So, what is strategic inevitability? This is a cube I built that is trying to explore the idea of you have a deck that is trying to do a thing strategically. Your opponent has a deck that is trying to do a thing. So the question is if both of your decks sort of do their thing, what happens next? Maybe if both of your decks do their thing, one of you by default is more likely to win when that happens. And so, there are decks built where it's like maybe my thing on the merits is not incredible if I let you do your thing, so I am partly trying to do my thing and partly try to prevent you from doing your thing, right? A match of Magic is not just solitaire among two players, and especially in terms of combo decks, this is obviously something that I've been very interested in for a while. The idea of like, oh, I go off or I go infinite or whatever, but the game doesn't end immediately. So like the first examples of this when I was building this cube that I thought of were, okay, your opponent has Kiki Jiki and something that combos with Kiki Jiki, like a Zealous Conscripts or something, and makes infinite attackers. And then your opponent has Constant Mists and a Crucible effect. So combat can't happen for the rest of the game. You're never going to deal combat damage. So you have infinite creatures, infinite attackers, but you functionally don't have an attack step, a combat step for the rest of the game. What happens next? Well, maybe your opponent doesn't actually have a way to win the game. They're just trying to lock you out of combat. So they're hoping to deck you by just letting you draw the rest of your cards, and if all of your cards were built to find and put Kiki Jiki and a creature into play and attack for infinite, then you're going to lose that way. But maybe you have a way to not get decked. And maybe your opponent doesn't. And so now the thing that is happening next is that despite the fact you've been prevented from attacking for infinite damage, and now you're, excuse me, now you're trying to deck your opponent, or you have a weird combination of cards that allows for some other thing. This particular kind of play, like a sight on the long term arc of a game, is something that I feel like was really important earlier in Magic's history. Partly because things like answers were so much more powerful than threats early in Magic's history. So, you know, there's the world of like frenetic Ifrit being like a premium way to kill someone in constructed. Um, and It's much less the case now that you have to care about this long-term strategic inevitability, because in the short term, tactics wise, all of the threats are so powerful that most of them threaten to end the game within a few turns of being unanswered. Um, and that was much less the case in the past. Um, there's people always talk about the sort of cranial extraction type effects, and in general how bad those effects are. I think that is like more true than ever now. They were always kind of bad, but now, if you cranially extract even a deck that is like leaning more towards control or combo deck that doesn't have a lot of ways to quote unquote win the game, that they can the individual ways they have to win the game are so powerful that as long as they have a few with different names, it's actually quite hard to put any modern deck into a position where they just can't win. And and I wanted a cube that would explore this. There's a, I wish I could, I'm not going to bother looking it up. There was an article by Sam Black, I think, about Old School, where they asked their opponent if their opponent had Library of Lang in their 75 during game 2, and their opponent said yes, and they just conceded on the spot. And I had to sit there and try to figure out, without reading ahead, why, like, Library of Lang seems like it does nothing. Why there's like clearly a bunch of one-upmanship involving exactly how things like land tax and scroll rack and all of these things are all work together to build an advantage, and their opponent had a way to dismantle certain things, and they had a way to dismantle certain things, and having a Library of Lang anywhere in their 40, I guess, or in their 75, like totally changed the matchup post board, and that's kind of the experience I'm looking for in terms of like, I have lost a game of this where I cast every spell in my deck for free and took infinite turns and made infinite creatures. And I'm not going to give the exact game state, but it came down to, I told my opponent, do you have a creature with a tap ability in your deck? If you have a creature still in your deck with a tap ability, you win the game. And if you don't, you lose the game. Obviously not every game in this cube is going to go to that, but like that is the vibe I'm trying to get to. That like, so what are combos? This is something that came up in the most recent playtest, that I think people have different feelings around what counts as a combo. Specifically, something that I consider like not fair game, but like part of the vibe is stack spaced lock pieces. So like combos that lock your opponent out of the game in some way. So Urza is not in here. Urza is way too powerful for this cube. I was trying to keep this like pretty low powered for reasons I will go into right after this. But if your opponent has Urza and Winter Orb, like this isn't a combo in that it doesn't make an infinite amount of a resource and win the game instantly. Excuse me. What it does do is it gives you a gigantic mana advantage on your opponent, right? They're locked under Winter Orb. You're tapping Winter Orb at the end of their turn so that you get to untap normally. And so this felt fair game to me. Like ways to lock your opponent out of different parts of the game. In the same way that a Crucible of Worlds effect plus Constant Miss was like a combo where it just says your opponent can't do combat anymore if they can't, kill your Crucible of Worlds or something. And I think different people feel differently about that. I would say that the biggest problems with this cube, not from a like, oh, if I fix these cards, this will fix the problems, but from like a base level, what it is trying to accomplish and with what cards. The two biggest problems are I have a bunch of low-powered combos, like A plus B combos, A plus B plus C combos, and what this means is for players who are newer to the game, but also just in general players who haven't drafted this cube before, or have drafted it maybe once. Other than me, there's like a few people in the world who have drafted this more than once, and even those people, they've drafted it maybe twice, and I've drafted it a dozen times. Where you look at an opening pack and you just see a bunch of cards, many of which maybe you've never seen before, and they are all asking you what card could exist elsewhere in the cube if you haven't looked at the list that could combo with this. Like, is this a good combo? Should I take this card that seems like it does nothing in hopes of, like, on the fly during the draft finding another card that normally does nothing but combos with this card? I've tried as much as possible to not make things traps where there's like, oh, this is there's nothing that works with this. I have, in some cases, because of power level considerations, made the thing it combos with lower power. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. Like Spike Feeder. You see a Spike Feeder and you're like, there must be a way to, when you gain life, you put a counter on something. And what is it? Archangel of Thune is like one of the go-to of those. I have Cleric class, which specifically you have to level up Cleric class to level 2. and then it gets that Archangel of Thune effect to make an infinite amount of life with Spike Feeder. But that's the kind of thing where even if you see Spike Feeder and you're like, there must be a way to go infinite with this, you might not read all of Cleric class if you're not familiar with it, and then you bypass that and you never find a way to go infinite with Spike Feeder. Or someone else in the draft sees Cleric class and they recognize, level 2 of this is an Archangel of Thune effect. I bet there's a Spike Feeder in this cube, and they pick that, and you pick Spike Feeder, and neither of you ever sees the other piece. So, this is like the number one with a bullet worst thing about this cube that is, like, in my opinion, kind of unfixable. There are things I can do to ameliorate this process. As you'll see here, every time someone comes up with a new combo, I add it to the overview here, and I have a QR code to this page on my cube box so that people in the middle of the draft or in the middle of games or in the middle of deck building, they can like look for, what combos with my cards. And I probably want to bolster this sort of even more to make it easier for people to find stuff. But it's just profoundly hostile, inhospitable to new drafters to the cube. And then the second thing is something that I hadn't figured out until this past week when I ran a draft, which is that people's appetite for like getting comboed on is very different. I think a lot of people are okay, even if they don't feel like, I had nothing to do in this game, or my opponent comboed me out on turn 4, there was nothing I could do. People's appetite for that is like a certain amount. People's appetite for maybe it not happening quickly, but it happening like suddenly and feeling like they couldn't interact has a certain appetite. And then the other part that I didn't realize could be a totally different appetite is this idea of getting locked out of the game in some way. So, my opponent played a Winter Orb, and the game's not over, and it's possible that the threats in this cube are weak enough that if my opponent is locking me out with some sort of one-sided Winter Orb effect or etc., I can't cast most spells anymore. I have a card in my deck that can stop this. I have 2 cards in my deck that can stop this. And they, with the threats that they have, even with this huge mana advantage, they're not going to kill me for 10 plus turns. So, like, the correct thing for me to do is to get ground under Winter Orb for 10 turns until I work up enough mana and possibly draw the cards I need to get out from under it. Like, that is one kind of gameplay that this cube is promoting, and I think for some people that's just miserable, and like way more miserable than my opponent made infinite creatures or dealt infinite damage or milled my entire deck. And I didn't realize that. I frankly love, the times in Vintage Cube when I'm playing like a low to the ground deck and my opponent gets out like a strip mine lock where they're strip mining me once or twice every turn, and I'm trying to figure out exactly which lands to play when, to play the like 3 or 4 spells I will have for the rest of the game. Like, that is profoundly interesting and entertaining for me. And I think for a lot of players, when their opponent, casts a Crucible of Worlds with a strip mine in play in Vintage Cube, the thing that they do next, if they don't have a spell that immediately deals with it, is they concede the game. It's very... I talked about decking earlier. As a win condition, I wanted naturally decking your opponent to be a possible way to win the game. I just did not realize how profoundly unfun a subset of players find that. Even players who are okay and bought into, we're both playing combo decks with like some amount of interaction but not an incredible amount, or with like interaction that has to be targeted in a very specific way. Where in the second thing, the second they get locked out of the game in some way, they would just concede instead. Like, they're not interested in playing under a lock piece. So that's something that I learned, and that really limits the possible audience for this. I've run this a few times in Baltimore with the Lucky Paper folks, like the sort of like Baltimore weekly cube community that has coalesced around the Lucky Paper Radio folks. And I had a good talk with Andy after the last one where we agreed that like I shouldn't just be bringing this as here's the third cube that we should bring tonight. Like I should be, if I want to bring this cube, I need to be soliciting people so that I have buy-in, because this is the worst possible cube for someone to just show up to and say, oh, there are seats in this cube, and they sit down, and like the odds that they are not the kind of freak who will enjoy this and they just have a bad time are like way higher than almost any other cube out there. And so I don't want to do a disservice to those players. At the end of the day, it is like Magic, so there's only like so bad a time they can have. But I think after talking with Andy, I agree that that's how I should be playtesting moving this forward, where I'm explicitly trying to collate and coordinate sickos to play it, and not allowing the vicissitudes of chance to drop random people into here who might have a really, really bad time. All right, I'm going to stop the video here, and when I come back, I will probably talk about various archetypes in the cube maybe next, or if I think of something more important. Maybe I will end this video. I want to talk about 2 inspiration cards, definitely, in the next video, in terms of how I decided power level. So power level and archetypes, I think, are the next video. And I'm going to see, maybe I'll do this in every video. I just want to go to sample pack here and view a sample pack. Because also, I've only drafted this a few times, and there have been card changes since then. So it's possible that I will learn something by doing a sample pack at the end of every one of these videos. Great. I'll give you a chance to read all of these if you're not familiar. And I'll talk very generally now once I've put out videos that are about like specific combos or specific card choices. I will go into them. But for this particular one, I'm just gonna like look at the ones that stand out to me. So right away, some of the ones that stand out to me: Merfolk Looter. There are things that combo with this card, but also Merfolk Looter is just a really good card in like almost any limited format. And this is especially true if you are trying to assemble A plus B, A plus B plus C combos. Merfolk Looter is really, really compelling. Feed the Swarm. Is this destroy target creature or enchantment with no restrictions? As I'll go over in the next video, I tried to make a lot of the removal, a lot of the instant speed. Oh, and this is sorcery speed too. But like a lot of the interaction spells are limited in specific ways, in the way that like Terror can't target certain kinds of creatures. So having this that can target any creature or enchantment with the downside that you can lose a huge amount of life, especially if you're targeting more expensive enchantments and creatures. This is a really, really good card to have. Revelark. Obviously, seeing Revelark, if you don't know anything about the list, even just looking at only the creatures in here, it's going to get value. Also something that maybe isn't necessarily clear from the creatures that you see in here, but like a 4/3 flyer for 5 is just good. You just could kill someone in 5 turns with that without having to do any kind of combo. And then other than that, maybe an Inscribed Tablet or one of the tri-fetches. But yeah, those 3 as like a first pick are the things that are most exciting to me. And I'll just make a point to note here that Aether Flash is currently on my watch list in terms of it not doing enough. The thing that I didn't realize about Aether Flash until the most recent draft is I kept paring down how many cards combo with Kiki Jiki, and there is no Splinter Twin in the cube. And so like Aether Flash was the kind of thing of, you can't go off with Kiki Jiki Pestermite, right? Because Aether Flash kills everything. And at this point, I've removed so many Kiki Jiki targets, and every Kiki Jiki target still in the cube has 3 or 4 toughness. So Aether Flash cannot stop one of the like marquee infinite creature combos. It can still stop making infinite 1/1 elves with Presence of Gond. There's probably some Revel Art combos that it can impact, but maybe not, because you can probably do a bunch of stuff at instant speed with all those triggers on the stack. So Aether Flash might not be pulling its weight in terms of like something to be in your sideboard to answer. Yeah, so those are all of my thoughts on this pack. And when we come back, I will talk about my influences related to power level. I'll talk about some of the archetypes that I was hoping to get in here. And we'll do another Crack-A-Pack.